This is the Why I'm Right podcast. Today's Wednesday, April 10th. I'm happy you're here because today's an episode you don't want to miss. I kick off the podcast talking about Biden coming out, calling Trump a dictator once again, and calling him the biggest threat to our democracy today. I break that down in detail. But the bulk of this podcast and the point of this podcast is to highlight and talk about the education crisis in America today. We have a crisis in our education system, and I believe what Joe Biden and the Biden administration are doing today with student debt relief and trying to cancel student debt is going to ruin this country for years to come. And I also think there's an agenda at play with the student debt relief programs. Some would call it socialism. And then I cap off this episode giving you my view, my vision, my opinion on how we can fix this education crisis and fix how unaffordable colleges and education is in this country today. And so listen up, because I'm going to tell you why I'm right.
We live in a world filled with noise and confusion, clickbait, and outright lies in the media. But here, we cut through the clutter to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This is Why I'm Right, the podcast where we dig deeper, ask the tough questions, and unravel the tangled webs of political and current events. Join us as we dissect the latest news, analyze political rhetoric, and challenge the narratives that dominate the mainstream discourse. We're not shy. From dissecting the motives behind policy decisions to uncovering the hidden agendas of public figures, it's what we do. It's time to think for ourselves. This is Why I'm Right. And now your unafraid and unapologetic host, Matt Taylor.
And he is right. I'm Matt Taylor, and today we have an episode, like I said before, you don't want to miss this one because we're tackling education in America. It's something that affects almost every single one of us one way or another. But let's kick off the podcast. If you didn't hear it, you didn't see it in the media, Joe Biden was out in public once again. One of the few times we see Joe Biden, we rarely see him, but every time he comes out of his cave, what does he say? Trump is a dictator and Trump is the biggest threat to our democracy today. He did it again yesterday, and I have to ask myself, I know I've said this a million times on this podcast, and I'm sure I'll say it a million times moving forward, but the MO and the strategy of the left in this country is to accuse the other side of doing exactly what you're doing. It's the easiest way to distract me from what Joe Biden is actually doing. So if he's out there in the media and out there in the public eye calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy and a dictator, I start thinking and looking the other way at who's the dictator. And when I say that, I make the argument today that we are living in a dictatorship under Joe Biden, and the one way to show that is through what he's trying to do today with student debt relief. And so when you look at it, and if you don't know about the student debt problem right now, obviously college education in this country costs way too much. You know, some schools are $50, $60, $70, $100,000 a year to attend undergraduate education at a college that you may or may not get a better education than if you went to community college. And so we have a problem with education, specifically college education in this nation. But now when Joe Biden comes out in the public eye and says, I'm going to relieve student debt, I'm going to cancel student debt, you have to start asking why he would do that. And I make the argument here, right now, that he is doing this to buy votes from young voters in this country. Look at his agenda right now to win the election in 2024. Look at it in detail. If he's buying votes with taxpayers' money and calling it student loan forgiveness, he's paying college students federal money to register voters, and they're calling it work-study programming. When he issues executive orders and demands federal agents to serve as part of the Democrat government machine, he calls it promoting access to voting. And we already know everything going on with voter ID. I did a whole podcast on this before. But when Biden and his administration and the left wing of the country right now, of our government right now, is opposing voter ID and signature verification in our elections, when we know that there were issues in 2020, whether people on the left want to admit it, we know that there were issues in 2020 with voter fraud. And then if you look at the fact that he's importing thousands and thousands, if not millions of people, millions of voters, Democrat voters for years to come through the southern border, he calls it humane immigration policy. And now we find out that he's blocking ballot access to RFK Jr. We already had a podcast on the fact that he won't give RFK Jr. Secret Service protection, even though his father and uncle both were assassinated in this country. But now he's blocking them from being on ballots in certain states and other third-party candidates. And what does he call it? He calls it defending democracy. And then the biggest one right in your face every single day, you hear it on the news every single day, he's going after his number one political opponent by using the Justice Department. And he's charging and going after and indicting Trump on 4 separate legally unprecedented charges. And what does he call it? He calls it justice. So the Democrat Party, I'll say one thing. I don't like a lot of things they do. They're very good at marketing, and they're very good at wordplay, and they're very good at calling things what they're not. You know, if it's justice to go after your political opponent on charges that no one has ever been charged for in this country before, if it's defending democracy by blocking ballot access to third-party candidates, if it's democracy, if it's not a dictatorship, to have voter laws in this country that don't make sense, to not require voter ID, to have open borders in this country where people are swarming in, if that means you're a dictator, I mean, none of this makes sense, what's going on in the country today. And what I will say to you is this. They call Trump a dictator and the biggest threat to democracy. I say it's because they're the dictator and the biggest threat to democracy. But here's the thing. Let's play along with their game for a second. Let's say Donald Trump is a dictator. Let's say Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Well, under Donald Trump, he must have been the worst dictator we've ever seen in the world, in world history. Because if Trump's a dictator by protecting the border and building a border wall to protect the citizens of this country, if Trump's a dictator by giving you more money back through tax cuts in this country, if Trump's a dictator for fighting for school choice, if Trump is a dictator for fighting for the rights of children in the womb, if Trump's a dictator, he's the worst dictator we've ever seen. And so I wanted to highlight that because the biggest issue that we're going to address today is about canceling student debt relief in this country, canceling student debt for people who have debts in this country. And I believe it's a socialist ideology and a way for them to take from people who have and give to people who don't. Take from people who may have paid off their student debts to pay off debts for others. And so when you break down the student debt crisis right now, and again, I started the podcast by saying, I know college education costs way too much. That's what we're going to solve at the end of this podcast. I know that already. But you can't just cancel debt for people. It's not even possible to cancel debt. And so I want you to listen to clip 1 here. It's Nancy Pelosi, somebody who I don't love personally. But she comes out and says that the president does not have the power to forgive debts. There's limits, folks. There's limits on presidential power. That's how our government was set up, with checks and balances. So listen to this clip. Here's Nancy Pelosi talking about how Biden does not have the power to forgive debts.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. And I don't even like to call it forgiveness, because that implies a transgression. It's not to be forgiven. Just freeing people from those obligations.
She almost said at the end there, it's not possible to forgive debt or cancel debt, any kind of debt. You think about it. We'll stick on student debt here. If you take out a loan, you get the money, you then give it to the school for the education. The money has already been paid. You go to school, you graduate or not, whatever the circumstance is, you go to school. And the debt is already paid by the creditor. The only way debt gets paid off is by taking money from other taxpayers, other people, other citizens of this country to pay your debt on your behalf. Because like I said, if you take out the loan and give the money to the school, the money is no longer in your hands. It's now been paid. So in order to get that debt relief, the money has to come from somewhere. And I'll just say this right now, I don't think we can print any more money in this country because all of it's going to Ukraine. So I don't know how we're going to print more money to pay off student debt. I guess that's an issue that Biden's going to have to address. But I think it's important because when we hear Joe Biden talking about these things, and he comes out, I'm going to play this clip here. Here's clip 2. This is Joe Biden talking about student debt relief.
From day one, my administration has been committed to fixing the broken student loan system and making sure higher education is a ticket to the middle class, not a barrier. My administration has approved debt cancellation for 4 million Americans through various actions.
Well, hold on a second. I thought Nancy Pelosi said Biden can't cancel debt or relieve debt. He doesn't have the presidential power to do that. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a dictator. I go back to it. Accuse the other side of doing exactly what you're doing. They call Trump a dictator, and all of a sudden I rolled through 5 or 6 things that Biden is doing today that would make him a dictator. So if he doesn't have the power, was Nancy Pelosi lying when she said he doesn't have the power? If he doesn't have the power to forgive debt, yet he just said we did forgive debt for 4 million Americans, I'm wondering where that power came from. And so, again, I want you to listen because I want you to understand this issue in detail here. Biden can't forgive debt. The only way the debt can get paid off is by taking the money from taxpayers, how the government is funded, taking the money from taxpayers who may or may not have already paid their student debt and pay the loan on your behalf. None of this makes any sense. So listen to this. This is Biden talking about how the Supreme Court ruled against him. Again, Nancy Pelosi was right for once. She said the president doesn't have the power to forgive debts. And the Supreme Court ruled the same way. But here, listen to Joe Biden, and then we're going to get into this issue even further. But listen to Joe Biden here talking about how the Supreme Court ruled against him, yet he's still pushing forward.
Tens of millions of people's debt was literally about to get canceled. But then some of my Republican friends and elected officials and special interests sued us, and the Supreme Court blocked us. But that didn't stop us. No, I mean it sincerely. We continue to find alternatives passed to reduce student debt payments.
You see, he tried to make that a political issue for a second there. He said Republicans and the Supreme Court ruled against us. Republicans sued us, and the Supreme Court blocked us. Again, trying to put the blame on the Supreme Court. But again, the Supreme Court's there to enforce the Constitution. And they said you don't have the power to forgive debts. Yet Biden continues and pushes forward to do something he doesn't have the power to do. So when you think about what the definition is of a dictator, it's when somebody takes power that he does not have, abuses that power, ignores the Supreme Court, and steals money from people citizens, taxpayers, and give it to other people who have less. Again, this is socialism 101. This is dictatorship 101. So this exact example here of student debt relief, which Biden is now in the public eye showcasing, I'm doing this. He's showing off. I'm doing this. But yet he doesn't have the power to even do it. And so when he takes power he does not have, abuses the power he does not have the power to abuse, he ignores the Supreme Court and then starts taking taxpayers' money in order to buy votes. That's the only thing that makes sense here, is to buy votes for himself because they'll now feel indebted to him. You understand that? If someone does a favor for you, you're in debt to them. Well, how is that going to get canceled out? Oh yeah, they're going to vote for you, Joe. So when you look at the whole picture of student debt, and you look at the whole picture I laid out before, he's buying votes from taxpayers and calling it student loan forgiveness. Going after his political rivals and calling it defending democracy. He's blocking ballot access to RFK and other third-party candidates. Again, this sounds like something a dictator would do. And so when you listen to that clip that I just played, he actually says he was sued. The Supreme Court ruled against him. They blocked him. And what does he do? He pushes forward. Joe Biden is the dictator the media wants you to think Donald Trump is. And I kicked off the podcast by saying it, and I've said it 1,000 times before. The best way to distract you, the best way to distract me from what's really going on. Again, it's wordplay here. Accuse Trump. If you don't want the word dictator to be associated with Joe Biden, accuse Trump of being a dictator. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is the dictator. It's a distraction, folks. It's a distraction. When Trump was in power, did he go after his political rivals? You know, there's a lot of talk about it in the election. If you remember in 2016, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. Well, when he got in power, what did he do? He didn't lock her up. You don't weaponize the Department of Justice to go after your political opponents. You don't take money from taxpayers and pay student debt on other people's behalf. Well, what happens to the people that paid their student debt? Do they get reimbursed? They get a check in the mail? What if you paid off $400,000, $350,000 of student debt in your lifetime, and now he's forgiving it for other people? Again, it comes to their favorite word, equity, equality, right? If we're playing on a level playing field, if you're going to cancel a debt for somebody who didn't pay it, you have to cancel a debt for somebody who did. That's not going to happen because we're living in a socialist society already. That's why Bernie got behind Joe Biden. That's why Elizabeth Warren got behind Joe Biden. Because he is the socialist movement. He is the socialist agenda, and he is a dictator. And so I promised I'd end the podcast here talking about how we can solve this. Because, again, to me, this seems very simple. There is a way right now for every single American citizen in this country to get free. When I say free, paid by the taxpayer, I'm fine with that. Free college education. There is a way right now where every American can get free college education in this country. Well, how? You give people the choice. The U.S. government should create an online American college. And again, I'm not saying this Democrat, Republican, anyone in power could do this today. They can create, you remember Trump, what did he do? He created the Space Force because there was a need. There was things going on. The evolution of technology, where we are as a society, the advancements in technology. Well, guess what? We now have advancements in technology where there is a way for every single American in this country to get a free college education paid for by your taxes. The government should create an online American college where we give the baseline, we give the core curriculum, right? You get your associate's degree, and it's done online. And think about this. If it was an American college, we could get the best professors in the world, in this country, to teach these courses, because guess what? If they do a lesson and it's on computers across the country, broadcasted to every single student in this program, in this college, we can get the best professors in the world to teach our students and pay them well. Something we don't do in this country. We don't pay our teachers well, our high school teachers, our middle school teachers. We don't pay them well. But guess what? If you had a universal college in this country where you gave just the baseline, right? If you want to specialize in certain things, then you can go on, and your student debt, again, would be much less because you already have your associate's degree. Free. And so when you really break down this scenario here, people would still have the choice to go to traditional college, a traditional university, have that experience. If that's what it is. If it's about going to college, that's fine. People could still do that. But what does this do? This makes it capitalism. Because if there is a free option for Americans, paid for by their taxes, it would force the other colleges, the other universities in this country to prove their worth. Show the consumer, show the student that you're worth $70,000 a year. If the U.S. government created a college, an online university, where we had the best professors in the world paid for by taxpayer dollars, where every single person could go to, already paid for, it would force the other colleges, the other universities in this country to do what? Prove their worth. And the best part about capitalism that actually works is if there was a free option where they're getting an equivalent or close to equivalent education, the other colleges and universities would have to lower their prices so that the students don't have to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. This is a common sense approach, and it's not a hard approach either. Think about it. During COVID, what happened? Many schools across this country, and you could say it's a lower level education, but when kids couldn't go to school in person, we were able to have them meet with their teachers, have lessons, and do school online. Do I think it's the best approach? No. But for somebody who can't afford, who needs to take out a loan of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, for somebody who needs to take out a loan in order to go to college, give them the choice of a taxpayer-paid university, online American college that gives them the baseline of education, gives them the core curriculum of education, gives them an associate's degree. And so it would force every college, every private college, every public college in this country, it would force them to do what? Lower their prices or prove their worth. That's how capitalism works. That's how capitalism works. Competition. And if the government is going to get involved right now on a mass scale and try to forgive people's student debt, where the government doesn't have the power to forgive student debt on behalf of the student, on behalf of the bank, on behalf of the university, and when they call it debt cancellation, just think about this. When they call it debt cancellation, if it was actually canceled debt, the college would not have received the funds. But the college did receive the funds. So somebody is just paying on your behalf. Which is what? Socialism. So you really have to open your eyes here, folks, because here's the thing. This student debt crisis is a crisis. It's a problem. The college education, the prices of college education, and everything going on isn't working right now. People go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and they never use their degree. Most people don't even use the degree that they got in college when they enter the workforce. And there are people out there, intelligent people. Charlie Kirk's a perfect example. He's somebody who did not go to college and show that he could do it. Ask many entrepreneurs in this country, where'd you go to college? Many of them would say, I did not go to college. Mark Zuckerberg, I don't like him either, but guess what? Mark Zuckerberg didn't complete college. The story, obviously, he dropped out of Harvard. He went to college. But you don't need a college education to be successful in this country today, and I think more people need to realize it. And instead of going in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that you will never be able to pay off, because when you get out of college, you get a $40,000 a year job, whatever it is, the system is set up for you to fail. And then Biden comes in, the dictator he is, with power he does not possess, and abuses the power he does not possess, ignores the Supreme Court of the United States of America to take taxpayers' dollars from you, from me, from anyone else to pay off some kids' college debt, 4 million Americans' college debt, and more to come. So break it down. How do we solve this education problem in this country? It's simple. The U.S. government, the President of the United States, whoever that may be, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's somebody else. If you want to fix real education in this country, all you have to do is create an American online college that is paid through your taxes. If you're a taxpayer, you get into that college. Doesn't mean you're going to pass that college, but you get in. You get accepted in. If you pay your taxes and you're following the laws of the land, you get into that college. And it's all online. We can hire the greatest and best professors in the United States of America today to teach online courses to millions of students at once. And so every student, every person, every taxpayer, every citizen in this country could get a college education paid for by their taxes. And it would force, through capitalism, it would force other universities, other colleges to prove their worth or lower their prices. Because if a student can get the same education, if not a similar education, at an online college that they do not have to pay any additional money, if they're a taxpayer and they're a law-abiding citizen, they are entered into the American college, whatever we call it. It would force, through capitalism, the other colleges, the other universities in this country to do one of two things. Prove they're worth the 70 grand a year, prove they're worth the 80 grand a year, or lower their prices because the competition is here. And like I said, I believe if we can actually get the best professors to teach these courses, we can actually improve the education in this country and not have what we have going on with the student debt crisis. Think about it. And so on future episodes, we have a lot going on this week. We're going to talk about DEI. Again, I said it yesterday. DEI must DIE. It must die in this country. We're going to break down later in this week Elon Musk comments on DEI, and then we're going to talk about election laws and things that are going on today that are going to impact the election in 2024. Laws that have been passed since 2020 that will affect the presidential election in 2024. And there are things going on in 2 states in this country, most notably Nebraska, where things don't make sense, right? We run a political system based on the Electoral College, and if you get the popular vote in that state, the Electoral College gives your state's Electoral College votes to the presidential candidate that received the most votes in your state. That doesn't happen in Maine and Nebraska. And so a lot's going on. There's obviously people trying to change that before the election, which could impact who becomes the next president of the United States. We're going to break that down later in the week, talk about it in detail. And as always, if you have something you want me to address, all you have to do is email me right now at matt@whyimrightpodcast.com, matt@whyimrightpodcast. And as I always say, we are growing every single day on this podcast, and we're going to continue to grow every single day on this podcast because I'm not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. So share these videos, share these podcasts, share the links with your friends, with your family. Subscribe to the podcast. It helps me out a lot. Subscribe to the podcast so that we can continue to push the message forward. Because I'll tell you something. The mainstream media is lying to every single one of us. And when the left is out there and the media puppets are out there telling you that Trump is a dictator and a threat to democracy, you need to know. I need to know. We need to look the other way around. Because when they are signaling and pushing out an agenda, a narrative that is one-sided, we need to look at the other side. And so I end this podcast by saying, just remember one thing. When somebody takes power they do not have, abuses that power, ignores the Supreme Court, and steals money from taxpayers in this country to pay off debt on someone else's behalf, that means they are a dictator. When someone goes after their political opponents by abusing the Department of Justice and abusing political power against their political opponents, when somebody's out in the public eye and is blocking ballot access to RFK Jr. and other third-party candidates, won't give them Secret Service protection, all of these things, when somebody has an open border policy where people who don't have citizenship in this country are coming into the country day in, day out, thousands and thousands, if not millions and millions of people coming in this country where you know fentanyl is coming in, terrorism is coming in, problems are coming in. And when that same person is opposing voter ID and signature verification for our elections, who's the dictator? Who's the dictator? So as always, like I said, like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, and I will be back tomorrow with more. This was the Why I'm Right podcast, and I just told you why I'm right.
You've been listening to Why I'm Right. Thanks for being a part of the Common Sense Army. Our passion is to cut through the noise and confusion and to bring light to clickbait and outright lies in the media. Unafraid, unapologetic, real and raw. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Why I'm Right, on X at Why I'm Right Pod. And for more, hit the website at www.whyimrightpodcast.com. See you next time.